Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fireside chat. Or maybe we can imagine, what we can imagine it's not a fireside chat, but this kind of plane conversation where we fly from one conference to another and just discuss, sit next to each other and discuss what's on top of our mind. And I think for me, oh yeah, sorry, technical thing. I forgot about that. If you have any questions or any opinions, you can just write them into chat. We decided to have it open, and then maybe you will influence somehow what we discuss. And then I think the biggest thing what's top on my mind this year is not where we won't use AI in localization, but where we want to have people. Because there are different options where to use AI. And if we start with that, then people may end up where we don't want. And no one but us, people should define where we are. So a few weeks ago, my colleague Daria, she was hosting a webinar about how the role of linguists may change with AI. And I think today we're discussing the other side of the table, how roles may change in enterprise localization with Wada'a. And I will probably start with explaining my angle and then I hand it over to you, Wada'a. I'm CEO and co-founder of Intento. We automate localization for large companies. And what I see a lot across customers, how we start, and normally they either don't use AI or they use kind of previous generation of AI, machine translation, and how through iterations we go through to a solution which people may not need to edit, and how people change the way they work, and how sometimes it's great for people and sometimes it's not. And I see that depends a lot on the decisions made in the very beginning of this process. So that's my angle. And I have few cases where stars definitely aligned and they actually bring lots of hope on the future of humans and localization. So what's your angle?
And this is a very good question, Konstantin, and we can certainly tackle and touch on the linguist roles, but we also want to consider how roles are changing on the buyer side of the business. This is where I spent most of my career. So now the dust has not settled yet, and the companies are being reactive. Even localization managers on the buyer side are trying to figure out how to carve out the right roles for their linguists. So AI is doing some of the heavy lifting in terms of scaling content, and then the linguists are being brought in to review this last mile of hyperlocal content prior to launch. So they're shifting gears from linguist heavy lifters to reviewers. And it's a concern because it requires a lot of change management. In other cases, the linguists are being called in to create content from scratch, just because the content in English maybe is highly creative and AI is not going to be able to provide the same quality for certain language pairs. It does a good job depending on which engine you leverage. Some engines do a good job with short form content for the creative side of things, others don't. So the linguists are now more moving towards, okay, I'm flexible, I can explore how to create content from scratch instead of translating or editing an AI output. So these are the two angles I'm seeing here in terms of the linguist role changing. There are other angles, and I'm assuming we're going to talk about them later, but how the localization managers are working on the buyer side and how they are reassigning the vendors' roles.
Hmm. Yeah, I see many cases like you described where people switch to review, but honestly, those are not that inspire me a lot because I see
Mhm.
that it's an intermediate step in a
Mhm.
way. And what inspires me is a situation when we see that human labor starts to be decoupled from the number of words. And
Mm-hmm.
we had one case which we had a webinar about it earlier, where one of the customers, they started to work having in-house team in one of the markets, a handful of people doing maybe how much handful of people can do, maybe 10,000 words a day, right? Tremendous expertise, like tens of years working for this company. Um, but that was a very tiny amount of all the content company needed to translate. It's related to news. And at the same time, there was zero error tolerance. And we started working with them. And when we started, and it's actually very typical, we asked what good translation is. And the answer was very simple. Many companies have this answer. A good translation is one which good translator looks at and approves, right? That's a good
Right.
translator. So just good. And we just started going iterations. And every time we were finding the next missing requirement. Honorifics, what's with proper nouns, what's with legally binding nature of text, we come to at some point, and on and on and on. And then we've seen how we brought translation very close to, fully match the requirements. And it was not engine, it was quite complex solution with LLMs and stuff. At the same time, through this process, interesting thing happened. People developed trust to this solution. They got a feeling over maybe 6, 9 months we were launching that. They got a feeling where they can rely on it, where not. If this is something new, they know that they will not. AI did not. They didn't see how AI works on it before. They would check it, and where we are now is that the same team, no one got fired, right? What they do today, we can describe as governance. They
Mm-hmm.
define the rules. They define what's right, what's wrong. They do spot checks. They put a very fixed amount of effort to that, maybe, I think, 10, 15% of their time. But it works for millions of words a day.
Mm-hmm.
And the nature of work changed. Everyone is quite happy.
Mm-hmm.
Company recognizes people much more because the market grew for them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
People have time to do other things. So that's kind of decoupling of effort from output. I believe it's something which happened in many industries already, right? Like fabric weaving, car manufacturing, stock trading, where people make decisions. They do design maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't depend on do we want to produce 100 yards of this fabric or 1 million yards of this fabric. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that leads to drastic changes. So do you see that on your end? Do you see that output is less attached to the labor
In
or
certain
effort?
cases, now what you just shared reminds me of my days with Zendesk because AI took the industry at scale when I was with Zendesk. And as you know, there's pressure top down. The leadership wants the workforce to adopt AI and yield cost and time savings. We had the foundation, we had a solid, well-oiled machine and localization, and it didn't take us much time to roll out use cases, AI use cases. But then, to your point, the roles have changed internally with my team. AI helped them tremendously through automating PM tasks, so it helped them break from the daily grind and focus on thought leadership, governance, orchestration. So it was actually a positive change for my team members because they're no longer focused on manual work. Um, Through automating PM activities or redundant activities, if you will, that they were
Hmm.
draining. But then also on the vendor side, we had to shift gears and reallocate roles. So by using AI, we don't no longer the workflow collapsed. When you use AI, the workflow collapses. So instead of having traditional translation followed by review and then in-country review, you rely on AI to do the heavy lifting. And then your agencies are the gatekeepers. So they're no longer the heavy lifters. They review the content, they
Hmm.
sign off on it. So instead of eliminating agencies, now we have three agencies or four agencies that are actually ready to review content, which helped us scale even faster. So that helped us separate the decoupling aspect, the way you mention it. But
Hmm.
I also, from a different angle, if you look from the buyer perspective, there are two angles. There's the HR and the procurement. On the HR people front, the pressure is top down, as I mentioned earlier. You have companies have invested around $750,000 in AI over the past years, and that money has to return, right? So the fastest way to return is to show progress on the eliminating labor. And the pressure comes from the CEO. How can you leverage AI to eliminate the FTE or the workforce? And it's a problem because when the CEO gets on stage and say, okay, well, the next 18 months AI is going to automate 80% of our workforce, they're not actually talking to the employees. They're talking to their investors. They're making a
Hmm.
promise that that money that you spent in a certain way, whether it's at a large scale or a small scale, has to return. So that creates fear, and then it's top down. The divisions are being asked to look at all of their org charts and see how they can reduce workforce to meet this promise without thinking of how operations will look like in 3 to 6 months. And the
Hmm.
other angle is the procurement side of things, because when reorgs happen and strategy change, procurement is also gets a lot of heat because they need to review all of their contracts, their vendor contracts, and see how they can create economies of scale. So
Hmm.
if any system engineer internally with an API integration with Claude or GPT can come and tell you, well, I can create a tool that will generate decent translation quality in 6 months. How can you, as a localization manager, sitting on a budget meeting, explain a six-figure platform contract to this team? So that's the challenge that localization managers are being faced with right
Hmm.
now, reducing the headcount and also justifying in a very compelling way why external tools and vendors are still extremely important in that environment.
Yeah. But those are different topics, right? And on the first of them, it's something what actually we discussed when we were discussing this webinar, is that I think on the business side, if your if your labor is very connected to the output, and this output very connected to the scale of the business, that you're inevitably in OpEx. The headcount is in
Operations.
OpEx.
Yeah.
It's an
Yep.
operational expense.
Operational
And
expense. Hmm.
what you described is what happens with OpEx, is
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
it has to be within boundaries with a year. It's relatively short term. It's kind of, it should, it affects EBITDA this year. It does
Hmm.
not it's not capitalized.
Hmm.
And I think what changes when labor gets decoupled from the output is that labor starts to be capitalizable. That's
Capital
what
expense.
we all have since ever with engineers, right? Even by
Hmm.
accounting principles in the US.
Hmm.
If you do R&D expense in engineering, you capitalize it and then you depreciate it over time.
Hmm.
For people, what it means is that the horizon of investment, it's an investment first, and the horizon of
Hmm.
decision making is much longer. And because
Hmm.
any of that is some sort of hypothesis, actually business has to do multiple bets there, which creates a lot of work.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
that like being in CapEx is like the best thing you can be. Because
If
in
you
this
can.
case, yeah,
Yeah.
if you can,
If
because
you
you
can
know
own that decision. Hmm.
the thing is, which is kind of not very obvious, but in OpEx you have a headcount and tools and compute and all the
Sure.
things. The thing
Hmm.
is that if the headcount is in OpEx, more automation you have, more cuts there will be. just because
Hmm.
that's how it works for executive level. The
Hmm.
only way to save yourself is actually to be decoupled from this.
Hmm.
It's a good question. Did you see these things happening on buyer side?
So far, no. And there's a reason for that. Localization managers or global experience and global content managers do not own the decision of where they sit in the org. These decisions are made behind closed doors, and oftentimes, whether you're working for a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 1000 company, they get announced all of the sudden. And then all of a sudden, you have a new cost center, new team, and you have to shift your narrative and onboard and manage up to introduce the new team to your capability. So, unfortunately, what you mentioned is so true. But I think where we need to help localization managers and the industry in general is how to shift the narrative and equip them with the right arguments and the right narrative so
Hmm.
they can internally ask to be on to sit under
Hmm.
capex instead of opex. But at the moment, unfortunately, they do not own that decision. They end up landing under a certain department and they have to navigate these waters. This happened to me during my time at Harley-Davidson
Yeah.
Motor Company. We
Yeah.
changed departments 5 times. Zendesk was the same. We sat under
Hmm.
brand, but we shifted gears a lot. So there's no clarity or visibility to the localization or global experience managers on the buyer side to make that call.
But I would say it's kind of chicken egg problem because you cannot reasonably consider localization as a capital expense
Mm.
if you have labor connected to your if it's an operating
Mm.
cost de facto. But I think what's possible maybe, and maybe you can validate this idea. I see that, for example, across different companies, localization is either under revenue or under costs.
Mm. Yep.
And when it's under revenue, it's much more investment way of thinking that we
Mm.
would invest in this market or we'll invest in all markets, and then over time we'll see returns. So maybe at least what localization managers can do, they can think about that when they are choosing their next gig, right? They can check where they will sit. Will they sit
Asking
under
the right
cost?
questions. Mhm.
Yes.
Asking the right questions, it's not guaranteed that it's going to change anything for them, but at least they have visibility of what they're up against when they join a certain organization. And I do think as an industry, we need to do better work at equipping localization managers on the buyer side to have the right narrative, because sometimes they're being asked. Like, where do you think localization should sit? They can provide a recommendation, but if it's not solid enough, if it's not business driven, then it's going to come across as lightweight and it's going to be dismissed. And
Hmm.
there's also a difference between, okay, are you joining a pre-established localization team where there's a lot of legacy, a lot of institutional knowledge, or are you building from scratch? Are you being brought in to build from scratch? For example, at Harley-Davidson, I was brought in to build from scratch. I had leverage and I was able to influence decisions. But at Zendesk, when I joined, it was a pre-established team. So I had to play by some rules and take my
Hmm.
time to build confidence and rapport before suggesting something more commercially efficient.
Hmm. Hmm. There may be another way to look at that is, when we're talking about role of humans working on the enterprise side,
Yeah.
right? And from the enterprise side, there's a very specific role all humans have.
Mm.
They resolve bottlenecks of business processes.
Yep.
When you have some bottleneck, that's where you need a person to
Hmm.
maybe another person, maybe the first person.
Hmm.
So I think what changes with AI, bottlenecks change, which kind
Hmm.
of explains why sooner or later it will change what people do. And I think if you think about these bottlenecks, there are two types of
Hmm.
bottlenecks. They're very different. One of them is something what AI still cannot do. So say we use AI we use machine translation, we use LLM or AI agents, and they still cannot grasp this nuance, of text. That's kind of a bottleneck, and
Mm-hmm.
potentially we can focus on that. Post
Mm-hmm.
editing is a good example of that, right? So AI still doesn't get this requirement we have. Let's post edit it. Problem with these bottlenecks is that it will be like arms race. Uh, Tomorrow, AI will do what's not able to do today, and you'll have to find something else. And that will be just never ending. There's another type of bottlenecks which are actually created by AI. And more AI used, more those bottlenecks will be. And
Mm-hmm.
to give you an example of that, how I think about that, is, well, like 10 people working together on a project. They have lots of common sense. They have
Mm-hmm.
lots of business understanding. So the governance is this case kind of shared because you have 10 pairs of eyes on
Mm-hmm.
this. But less people you have there, more done by machine, less common sense and business understanding you have, or even human understanding, more valuable it is. So I see actually governance is actually a bottleneck created by AI. As soon as you brought this, soulless machine into the process, you need to have governance, and more of it you have, more of that you need. So that's why I'm kind of thinking that when it's about post editing, it's maybe kind of a dead end in a way. When it's about focusing on controlling AI, that's the right thing to do. What do you
Mm-hmm.
think?
I like the way you put it when you said that bottlenecks are the result or are the reason for creating a governance layer. I think it's so accurate and so true. People think that, oh, we just came up with a new orchestration role or a governance role and it's great. It's actually there to solve a problem that was not even there before AI. So I agree. I think we're aligned on this one. Now, I go back to the client lens. So everything you're saying
Hmm.
is so true, 100% true. How do you explain that internally? How do you navigate these waters internally and let people know that, yes, there's institutional knowledge that AI cannot replicate. And this knowledge shows up usually when things break. On Thursday at 4 p.m., when things are on fire and your client is waiting, AI is gonna not gonna resolve this for you. This is your team members, their judgment, their instincts, their institutional knowledge. So how can we package this story and evangelize it internally on the buyer side so it has visibility and it gets also type of a support from the leadership?
Hmm.
Because again, from top down, the focus is okay, we have AI, we put investment in it, and that money has to return. The fastest way is to eliminate roles and have this one person, the governance person, manage everything, only to realize after a while that it was not sustainable. But short term, they demonstrated some results. It's more of a framing situation and a narrative situation. And we need to think of how everything you said right now so eloquently needs to be packaged and presented in a commercial way on the buyer side that resonates with the leadership.
So how?
Well, I can provide some examples.
Uh-huh.
Reframing is something that helped me throughout my career, whether on your on the many in the manufacturing side, the cutthroat environment in the Midwest, where people had a specific opinion of how a bike should sound, and or the tech environment where people relied on Slack for communication and thought email was retro. So reframing helped me tremendously in both of the situations because it's not about objecting or rejecting what the other side is saying, but it's showing a different angle that resonates with them.
Hmm.
And I'm actually experiencing this right now with my clients. Just to give you an example, just a few weeks ago, I was working on an structure for a client of mine, and they had a weakness in branding. So one of the suggestion was a CMO organization, and it was designed a certain way. Um, And of course, localization and global experience sat there because it was highly creative content. But during the steering committee meeting, one of the team members reacted right away saying, well, we tried that out in the past and it did not work. So instead of saying, well, it actually works because it's a key function, I asked the question, did the CMO organization not work because of it as a capability or because of the bad hires? And then there
Hmm.
was silence in the room because the issue was not the division itself. It was the
Hmm.
hires. They didn't have the right people in the right
Hmm.
roles to support. So that type of reframing bought us some time and they started reconsidering the situation.
Hmm.
Another
Hmm.
situation, localization specific, I had during my time at Harley. My team members were trying to convince, one of my team members was trying to convince the compliance team that they needed Southeast Asian languages for owners' manuals and service manuals
Hmm.
because it was a better experience. And they weren't convinced enough. The compliance team was not going to invest on any translations. So when she came, she escalated the situation to me. I said, okay, well, explain to me, replay the entire conversation for me, beginning to end. And once when she finished, I realized that you're talking experience with compliance folks and engineers.
Hmm.
When we look at the contract of compliance contract with our export company, it says without owner's manuals and service manuals, bikes won't ship. It's a compliance issue. And when you
Hmm.
lead with that argument, then not only compliance are on high alert, sales are on high alert, markets are on high alert. It's not about the experience, it's about the
Hmm.
business critical
Yeah.
situation. So we called for another meeting, and I had her put on the first slide just a bold statement without localized owner's manuals, service manuals, bikes won't ship. That
Hmm.
was the shock and awe statements. That's the
Yeah.
type of reframing. Global experience is important. What she was saying was true, but was
Yeah.
it relevant to the audience she was speaking to? It wasn't. So
Yeah.
the way we do that, the way we reframe is that you need to first and foremost understand your audience, their pain points, what's business critical to them, and build your narrative as a localization manager to resolve all of these pain points.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a great example of smart communication, and I think many people notice in the industry that in localization we have certain jargon,
Certain?
which
Dozens and
which
dozens.
yeah, which kind of is not understood outside. And I think this skill which you described is one of actually upskilling situations which may be needed
Certain.
because we see at also at some of the companies where they would start kind of they would have traditional structure with project managers who work with translators or LSPs, but then as management gets automated, the team would turn into something more like a center of excellence, basically a global team, which would work with all the stakeholders. And for that, they need to be able to, you don't want to talk post-editing to customer support, right?
Or fuzzy matches, or even TMS.
You want to talk ticket deflection rate, right? Or like in a compliance example. So that's probably another type of role
Mhm.
change, what we see, what I see.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
No, thought leadership, definitely. I spent most of my career in that angle. So I delegated all of the operations to my team members, and my role was to coach my team members how to build their narrative and also build bridges across the organization. I never used localization language in my work, ever. When we addressed the marketing team, it was all about email clicks, traffic to the website, engagement, and product
Hmm.
messaging engagement. When we spoke with the compliance team, it was all about governance and avoiding fines, and that's what earned us trust and rapport. And in fairness, this represents around 40% of my consulting work right now, coaching and
Hmm.
working with vendors on how to master the narrative of the client, be relevant, and also how they help their own clients navigate internally in order
Hmm.
to stabilize the relationship with the vendor. It's a big
Hmm.
opportunity, and I'm quite concerned that after decades and decades of experience in loc, we haven't evolved fast enough in this space.
Yeah, that's actually, it's quite surprising is that from the AI side of things, we know that translation is actually the first application of any new AI technology since 1950s,
Mhm.
just because of their national importance and
True.
factors. So what everyone, in their dog now learning how to edit those AI drafts, well, in localization, we do that like at least last 20 years.
Right.
But there are some barriers why this knowledge is not being transferred. And I think this kind of unique atmosphere and jargon may be one of them.
Mhm.
Do you
It's a
see
certain one,
do
though.
you see people in localization being able to kind of effectively share their because I mean just if you think anything which is being automated with AI now through drafts which require subsequent editing, right?
Mhm.
So potentially the processes which used by localization team can be very useful for those cases. Do you see it happening? Do people share
I
this knowledge?
didn't. We had leveraged it once for English because we were localizing materials in the US, but for California.
Mm.
So we had a
Mm.
translation memory specific for California because of laws and regulations. So
Yeah.
we exposed the team to the availability of a translation memory that you can also leverage in your own language. It doesn't have to be a
Hmm.
language pair because you have
Hmm.
this knowledge and you can leverage it.
Yeah.
And they were excited about it, but it was a use case. It was a specific use case. Um, to your question around, to answer your question around, am I seeing this happening? I have not seen it happen, but I applied it myself. Again,
Hmm.
when I worked with Harley, I knew the minute I stepped into the headquarters that any localization experience was not going to matter at this point. What was going to matter the most was building credibility and understanding people's roles. I think the greatest opportunity for localization managers is to understand the capabilities around them. They're so concerned about being understood that they forget about understanding the divisions cross-functionally.
Hmm.
When you understand the divisions cross-functionally, their pain points, and how you can resolve them, you start building confidence and rapport. And this is when they start to listen. And this is when they trust you and they want to learn more about what you're doing. But if you're constantly focusing on presenting on what you do, then nobody's going to be interested. So, for example, I go back to the divisional narrative. With
Hmm.
marketing, my entire presentation for Loc was not about Loc, was about the experience, the traffic, the email clicks, and how it was tied directly to the revenue. This is how I was able to show the value of the work. With compliance, obviously, when we had to fly to Canada because two dealerships were shut down because of the parts and accessories were not localized, and we
Hmm.
showcased how this needed to be done, I got the trust of the compliance team. And that would be my number one recommendation for the localization team now. Instead of being so focused on being understood as a capability, understand the divisions around you if you're on the buyer side and build your narrative to meet those expectations and resolve these pain points. People want to be heard. When you're on the buyer side, people are looking for someone to help them resolve their issues. And in an AI charged environment, people want to be heard more than ever now.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think in a way that's actually a movement from um, translation function to center of excellence because
Oh, certainly.
You're starting to work with all those different departments speak their language. And that's actually where we've seen cases where, despite a full automation of project management, localization teams or language teams grew immensely because if it's a big company, you have to work with 50, 60 departments which
Mhm.
need language, and actually everyone needs language by the end of the
Certainly.
day. So if you can
Yeah, and new
understand
roles too.
why exactly it matters,
Mhm.
uh, or explain why it matters as well,
Yeah.
then yeah, it works. And it's important that I think this is not something um, threatened by AI. This kind of coordination with other teams and enabling them, it's actually being um, it's elevated by AI.
Oh, certainly. And we're seeing a new roles um, because of the need. Now, AI is creating a new economy, right? So a lot of the roles that are going to happen are not available yet. We're still trying to figure things out. The dust has not settled yet. But
Hmm.
the governance role, we talked about it. The orchestration layer, especially if you're using hybrid models or multiple models and you need this orchestration layer, which is very favorable on the buyer side right now because it gives you full control without responsibility if something breaks. But it remains the single weak point sitting in your house. So if that orchestration layer breaks, everything else breaks if you're using multiple tools. So governance and orchestration is on the rise. Also, people in some companies are trying to figure out the predictability, the revenue predictability. So you have a part-time or a full-time person, and his or her job is to assess all of the AI tools, not just in localization. So
Hmm.
MarTech, EdTech, wherever you're sitting in the org, assess all of the AI tools and predict revenue and performance based on the AI tools. So we're seeing roles emerging, and we're going to
Hmm.
see what I think.
Hmm. Interesting. Uh, orchestration layer is actually another thing which we see. It creates new, at least new activities, but eventually I think new roles. Is that I think it was a presentation by um, Mikhail from Genetech at oh sorry no from Guidewire at one of the LocVerse about how they had their TMS, they had their AI, but to make it work, they needed to build a whole orchestration between the systems because um, TMS is often doesn't have enough capabilities or flexibility. And I think to make this, it also requires understanding very well how those other systems used by different departments and how they
Mhm.
should work together.
Yeah.
And also, I think orchestration is an interesting word in general, because what it means essentially, it means when what you have from the shelf is not enough, what you need to build around it to make it fit. And I think there are at least two types of orchestration we see. One of them more related to orchestrating like data flows, how the content goes from one system to another, how we track what's the master copy and what are the changes, and things like that. But another type of orchestration is actually relates to the role of localization, some of the topics we mentioned as well, is that, but it's what I see. Big companies have very specific quality requirements.
Mm.
If we just go from this, it's good if, good translator says it's good, then you see that every big company has very specific requirements, which are context dependent. You cannot really, even learn some of them from data.
Mm.
And you totally cannot get it from, say, just GPT or just other model. But that's I think, today most popular question asked by management down to localization team, right? As what you mentioned, like we have GPT, why do you need to spend like
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands on this localization specific platform? And actually, orchestration is the answer, right? Is that in being able to explain what is missing in this off-the-shelf tool.
Mm-hmm.
What is so special about this big business and its requirements to quality and to
Mm-hmm.
translation, to language in general, and why orchestration is done. So I think it's a very important skill because it's not only about why or if you need any of the orchestration solution. With AI doing translations, localization itself is an orchestration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. Now, from the buyer side, orchestration is the answer to a company having a dozen of tools that don't talk to each other and working in silence and working in silos, sorry. So
Hmm. Hmm.
this is where the orchestration becomes the solution. Like, okay, you have all of these tools. They work very nicely as a swim lane. They're performing under marketing. They're performing under tech. They're performing under language translation, but they're not talking to each other. So this is where the TMS or the localization team or manager can rise from being just a provider of translation memory to the integration layer across all of these tools. And that's the type of narrative that should be adopted.
Hmm.
Because again, we can talk about how orchestration works with vendors. There are a lot of scenarios happening as we speak. And there are a lot of tools right now that allow you to connect to multiple, just like Intento, like it's tool agnostic. You can leverage tools as much as you want if you're in that system or in that ecosystem. But the buyer side is quite complex when it comes to how you present localization. In the past, the narrative was focused on TMS, 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 translation management system. You cannot replicate that. It's the crown jewel. Now it's different. Now it's we can be the layer that integrates all of these tools that are siloed. So it's no longer the brain, but it's part of the governance piece. And that's what clicks with buyers and all
Hmm. Hmm.
specifically procurement.
Hmm. But you see, that's where I think maybe I see things a bit differently.
Yeah. Vendor
Just
client, vendor client.
yeah, I mean, yeah, that, but also I think just the way we cater customers, we're kind of looking at like one of the feature I mentioned is that they need very specific quality, very specific
Yeah,
type of
certain.
translation. In other is that um, it's not enough to localize content, right? You need to localize experience. And for a
You
big
and I know
company,
that. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it has very practical implication
Hmm.
that you have touch points. Every touch point is a software system. It's owned
Hmm.
by different team. It's very, very technical.
Hmm.
But if you look at the volume, then everything in TMS, typically just across our customers, it would fit in like 2% probably for volume. The rest, it happens in real time where you cannot post edit. You cannot, TMS doesn't handle it normally. And in that case, we see more and more situations where it's all about basically direct connection to content sources through APIs and stuff like that. Um, and that creates its own need of orchestration outside TMS and beyond it. Actually, I'm curious. So, if you hear, and you mentioned that you kind of, and I know that in Harley and Zendesk you work with TMS a lot. If you would hear that an enterprise company doesn't use TMS, what do you think is a problem or it's a progress for them?
Well, most enterprise companies are using TMS, but they don't know they are because they rely on the vendor.
Mm.
So from a
Oh,
procurement
like
perspective,
they
from a
outsource it.
Yeah, they outsource it. They don't want
Yeah.
to worry. In the past, you the big players were known, right? So you would go with, let's say, I'm gonna drop names now, SDL, NamoQ, because this technology was so specific, you cannot replicate it. So
Mhm.
we're
Mhm.
just gonna acquire this tool. But now the LLMs level the playing field. So it's
Mhm.
no longer about having a single TMS or acquiring the
Mhm.
TMS. You can partner or you can subscribe with a tool that will grant you access to multiple tools. So the idea of the TMS is not top of mind for a client.
Mhm.
It's not top of mind. They don't think the way we do as localization folks. So the
Mhm.
way you want to present it is like it's a tech stack, and the TMS is part of this tech
It's
stack.
part of it.
But
Part of it.
at,
Yeah.
at the altitude of the leadership, they're not interested on how you're getting it done.
That's right.
They which tools. They want to see the result.
Hmm. Actually, since we're talking about orchestration, I think, I mean, orchestration is a word. It's a popular word, right? We need to know it. And I think that that's also interesting thing what maybe localization people need to do is to understand how things which are called in certain way in localization called today by others. Because suddenly you can find that actually do something really cool. Like if you think, even when your TMS extracts fuzzy match,
Mhm,
and then, okay, it's being manually edited. That's retrieval augmented generation practically. It's a human generation, but it's retrieval augmented generation in a way.
mhm,
So you put on top of it LLM to edit it instead of human. Well, that's RAG, and you have it maybe for years. Uh,
mhm, mhm,
I think this kind of terminology, savviness, right? Being able to describe it in a way that engineering team will feel it's cool. It's also maybe quite important
It's the
because,
reframing.
yeah,
The ability to reframe, the skill to reframe is the skill. And it's sector agnostic. You don't have to learn to reframe if you're in manufacturing or if you're in tech or without AI. This is a lifelong skill. It also helps you in your personal life because it builds
mhm,
bridges.
mhm,
And so you mentioned something very important about orchestration when you mentioned that the localization managers and teams need to understand how the tools around them work. So that aligns with what I mentioned earlier about this is not about you or your capability. This is about the world around you. The more you understand, for example, how Figma works or Pendo Guide works or AEM works, the more you are equipped to come across as a thought leader and provide solutions, and you're not siloed in your own localization world. Because I can attest to you that localization on the buyer side is a very lonely world, and it's on you to open up and build bridges.
I would even say not even how specific, not only how specific tool works, but how it works in your company. Because
Certainly.
one of the reasons a few companies I know did orchestration around TMS is that they understood that the way they use CMS leads to creating um, source copies in target market, which are then being
Mhm.
used for subsequent translation or editing. And that's something which almost, I mean, sorry if there are any TMS vendor. I think almost no TMS supports that. And they all had to, all companies I know, they had to implement it around it. But I think it's very important knowledge is that a localization team can know their enterprise needs so much better than any uh, external vendor. Just
Certainly.
as
Yeah,
curiosity.
when AI took industries at scale, TMSs were already integrating with CMSs. So the only difference was, okay, now we need to expand the scope. We need to embed AI features into the TMS. But the foundation was there, and AI came to accelerate it. So we had an advantage if you compare to MarTech, to
Yeah,
EdTech, to MedTech. We had an
yeah.
advantage as an industry.
I think we're approaching the end. I think we should maybe leave time for questions. So maybe we can just say some quick takeaways. What you would like audience to uh, take away?
Well, Uh, I would say the dust has not settled again. So anyone who comes and tell you that this is how things should look like in 1 year from now, you should not believe them, because we're still reacting, we're still learning. And I go back to the skills that survive any sectors and any disruption. And one of them is reframing and understanding your audience most and
Hmm.
foremost. And the third skill I would say is having bias towards time. That
Hmm.
period between idea and execution needs to be shortened. Part of my
Hmm.
success is that I was faster than anyone else throughout my career. But I was deliberately fast, so it wasn't like reckless fast. But by the time when AI, for example, took the industries by storm, other departments were trying to figure things out, were putting meetings on the calendars, ideation, defining who needs to be on that meeting. My team and I have already made 4 or 5 mistakes and rolled out 4 AI use
Yeah,
cases.
yeah. No,
So that bias towards time, and especially vendors, that time frame to build a connector and to invite various people and get clearance from tech is not
yeah,
going to fly. You're not going to be competitive if you don't have bias towards time.
yeah. I think that's very important insight. And there's this popular saying which says you need to realize that the the AI you use today is probably, the worst you will use in future.
Hmm.
Because it will be better and better. And actually, one of the customers shared how they started their AI program. They started it when AI was not good, but they explained to management exactly that, is that it will be better, and the belief in that it will be better is actually their core enterprise strategy.
Yeah.
So since it will be better, let's start earlier with procurement security, all the mistakes we can do. Let's do it while it's bad, because then
Yeah.
things will be just better. And now, yeah, they had one of the most successful launches. Yeah, what I would say, and I think your answer partially answers question about skills which we have in the chat, like what capabilities are most important. So what I would say as a takeaway or something what I would suggest to think about is that again, it's not about where we want AI, it's where we want humans. But
Hmm.
when you look, and there are different options to go about AI on the market. When you do your choices, um, it will be different brands and different solutions. But what you need to pay very careful attention to is that different approaches to using AI for localization assume different place for humans in the future. And
Hmm.
it's not that one of them is right and others are wrong. No,
Hmm.
but one approach may assume like total elimination of humans from the process. And it will be right for some things, but the question is, do you want it to be right for you and your company if you are a human
Hmm.
person working there, right? Another approach may assume um, complete outsourcing of localization in future. Again, you may pick it. It may be right for some companies. Will it be right for you? So I think you need to really think where your and your team roles with this solution fully rolled out will be the ones you want to see. And that's something which people very often leave to just let's see how it goes. Don't let it to how it goes. You need to start from thinking what you want to do as a localization manager in 5 years and what solution you need to have in place to do what you want to do, to bring that impact to your company in the way you want to bring it. I think that's really important.
Mhm. Excellent points.
Uh, we have a few questions. Hmm.
Okay.
One of them is, so I think a question about skills and capabilities, I think you kind of answered it. I think we can, unless
Okay.
if Sarah agrees. There is another question from Sarah Matthews is, what do you think, will localization teams get smaller or just different?
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for the question. Nobody can answer this question right now, to be honest. It's going to be different. The teams are going to be different for sure. We're already seeing it. But smaller or bigger is going to be largely driven by the company and the industry and what happens tomorrow. Everything we're discussing today might be irrelevant in a couple of weeks from now. This is how fast we're moving in the
Yeah.
industry. So the straight answer to this would be yes, they will be different.
Well, I would add to that it greatly depends on the approach.
Mm.
You can do it in a way that your team will be smaller. You can do it in a way that your team will
Yeah.
be. The example I brought is that like one of the customers, I think in the past they had more traditional approach to localization, and now they turn team into a center of excellence, and they manage 99 localization use case across 99. The team grew way bigger because there's just many more, and TMS is one of them, just to
Mhm.
sure. Other things, there's just direct connections to specific tools used by specific team, and their team growth is justified because it brings huge direct impact across the company, and it requires this coordination and taking care of certain aspects. So
Mhm.
that team, it's very important to understand, to have locus of control here. The team will be of size, which is defined by how you design your work and how
Mhm.
you design your solution.
Mhm.
Um, we have another question from Hannah. Are clients expecting too much from AI right now or not enough? What do you think?
Thank you, Hannah, for the question. Of course, because as I explained earlier, you have 750 billion almost invested in AI right now, and that money needs to return. So there's a huge expectation to for AI to deliver. So the answer is yes.
Uh, I would again say it's more nuanced. Because to give an example, like a very practical example, if you use AI just to have less post editing, but to have lighter post editing and expect huge discounts from your LSP vendors, you will not get those huge discounts
But it's still
because
an expectation.
yeah, I
It's
mean
still an
that's
expectation,
no no
Konstantin.
wait
So,
wait
so
wait
you're
wait wait
talking about it's not gonna happen, but the
but
expectations are there.
yes but wait a second. What I mean, in this case, you're expecting way too much. Because what you will see that at certain point, if your vendor has to touch the sentence with one finger, you'll have to pay for that. And it can be lower than that because they have like a chain of contracts, subcontracts. In this case, you expect too much. But at the same time, if you expect that AI is good only to produce draft for post editing, well, you expect not enough because there's more and more cases where, I mean, I would say even in almost any case, it's now possible to build automatically accurate translation. Not in all cases there is an ROI in that, because in some cases you'll end up having an FTE AI engineer instead of FTE linguist, and that's not what you want. But in some cases, you can actually expect way more than people normally expect. So it's nuanced.
Everything is nuanced for the next year, I think.
Oh yeah, until singularity hits. Mm. All right, I think we're at time, right?
Okay.
Thank you so much for uh, joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the
Yes,
invite. Great
very nice
conversations.
start of the day. Thanks, Wada, and thanks everyone for coming. Yep,
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
go on. Bye bye.
Bye.